Eli was already regretting stepping outside. After Jeff left, the buzz around the car only got worse. Kids were still lingering, whispering, and staring at him like he was some kind of rare animal at the zoo. He couldn't stand it. He hated the attention, hated the idea that everyone now had some new story to tell about him. One that wasn't even his to own. As he walked back inside the school, he could feel their eyes on him. There goes the kid with the famous dad, they were probably thinking. Wonder what it's like to have so much money. Eli squeezed through the crowded hallway, trying his best to shrink into the walls. But it didn't help. No matter how much he tried to stay out of the spotlight, it seemed like it was following him. He had to get away. He walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the sink. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, trying to make sense of everything. Why did it feel so different now? He wasn't sure what he was expecting when he showed up at school today. But it wasn't this. It wasn't people suddenly looking at him with a new kind of curiosity. It wasn't kids coming up to him asking questions he didn't have answers for. And it definitely wasn't feeling like he was the subject of some kind of reality show he didn't sign up for. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to push the thoughts away. But they kept coming back. Why couldn't people just see him for who he was? Why did they have to attach his name to his dad's? He jumped when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching the bathroom door. Someone knocked softly. Eli. A voice called from the other side. It was Mr. Davis. Eli sighed. What now? He opened the door a crack, peeking out. Yeah, he said, trying to sound normal, even though everything inside of him felt like a mess. You okay? Mr. Davis asked, his voice quieter now. I noticed you left the cafeteria pretty quickly. Eli shrugged, avoiding eye contact. I'm fine. Mr. Davis stepped closer, his face filled with concern. You sure? If you need to talk, I'm here. Eli almost said something but then stopped himself. Talk about what? What was he supposed to say? Hey, my dad's a billionaire. And now everyone's looking at me like I'm special when I don't feel special at all. No, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't make sense. Instead, he shook his head. It's nothing, Eli muttered. I just need some space. Mr. Davis hesitated, but then he nodded. Okay, but remember, you don't have to do this alone. If you want to be in the play, or if you need anything else, I'm here to help. Eli didn't say anything, just nodded. He didn't want to be part of the play anymore. Didn't want to be part of any of it. But there was something in Mr. Davis's voice, something that made Eli feel like he couldn't just walk away from it. After a long pause, Mr. Davis finally turned to leave. Take care, Eli, he said, walking back toward the hallway. Eli stayed in the bathroom for a few more minutes, staring at his reflection. What now? He didn't have an answer, but somehow he knew he couldn't hide forever. The play, the attention, his dad, it was all tangled up now. And no matter how much he wanted to escape it, it seemed like he had no choice but to face it head on. By the time lunch rolled around, Eli couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, kids were talking about him. Some were whispering, others were outright staring. He tried to ignore it, shoving his tray of food in front of him and sitting at the back of the cafeteria, hoping no one would notice him. But it didn't work. Hey, Eli, Jake called out from across the room, his voice loud enough for a few people to turn and look. Your dad's got the best cars. Huh. Eli just stared at his tray, hoping the floor would swallow him whole. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt tight, like the words wouldn't come out even if he tried. Seriously, Jake continued, now walking over with a couple of friends. You gotta tell us what it's like living with him. You know, with all that money and stuff. Eli felt a sharp pang of frustration in his chest. Why couldn't people just let it go? He didn't want to be the kid with a famous dad. It wasn't like it was something he had any control over. Jeff Bezos might have been his dad, but he wasn't the person he talked to every day. His mom had moved on years ago, and Eli had never been close to him. I don't live with him, Eli muttered, pushing his food around on his plate. But it didn't matter. Jake and his friends didn't care about the details. They were too busy imagining what it must be like to have that kind of life. "Come on, man," Jake said, grinning. "What's he like? Is he always flying around in jets, or what?" Eli wanted to scream. Why did it even matter? The more they pressed, the more uncomfortable he felt. He didn't want to be known for who his dad was. He just wanted to be Eli, the quiet kid who liked reading books and sketching in his notebook. It didn't matter who his dad was. Why couldn't people see that? Just then, Mr. Davis walked into the cafeteria, his loud voice carrying over the chatter of the students. All right, he said, clapping his hands. "Attention, everyone." The noise died down, and Eli looked up, grateful for the distraction. Mr. Davis had a way of commanding attention, even without trying. "I just wanted to remind you all that the school play auditions are still open," Mr. Davis said, a little too enthusiastically. "Don't forget, it's a chance to show your creativity and step out of your comfort zone." Eli's heart sank. He wasn't sure he wanted to step out of his comfort zone anymore. He wasn't sure he even had one anymore. Mr. Davis caught Eli's eye from across the room. He gave him a friendly wave, but it wasn't like before. There was a hint of something different in his expression now. Maybe he saw Eli's name on the list and thought he could be something special. Maybe he was just trying to encourage him, but it didn't feel like encouragement. It felt like pressure. The kids around him had already started whispering again. "I bet he's gonna get a lead role," one of them said, loud enough for Eli to hear. Eli's face burned. He didn't want this. He didn't want any of it. But he knew, deep down, that he couldn't escape. Not anymore. Not with everyone watching. Not with Mr. Davis now looking at him like he was meant for something bigger than he ever wanted. Maybe it was true. Maybe he wasn't meant for the spotlight. The day of the school play came faster than Eli expected. For weeks, he'd thought about quitting. There were too many eyes on him now. Too much pressure. But something about what Mr. Davis said kept echoing in his mind. "You don't have to do this alone." He didn't want to run anymore. Maybe this was his chance to show everyone who he really was. Not Jeff Bezos' son, not the shy kid, just Eli. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Students were running backstage, costumes in hand, lights flashing, teachers shouting directions. Eli stood in the corner, already in costume, his heart pounding in his chest. His palms were sweaty. He wasn't sure he could do it. He took a deep breath and peeked through the curtain. The crowd was bigger than he expected. Parents, teachers, students, every seat was full. And right in the front row, he spotted him. Jeff, his dad, was actually here. Eli's stomach twisted, but he looked away quickly. "Focus," he told himself. "Just focus on the scene." The curtain rose. The lights hit the stage. Eli stepped forward. At first, his voice was quiet. The nerves were there, clinging to him. But then he remembered the lines he practiced every night. He remembered the story, the character, the reason he joined the play in the first place. He kept going. Line after line, his voice got stronger. He wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. He wasn't thinking about his dad. It was just him and the story. And something amazing happened. The crowd started listening, not because of who his dad was, but because of him, his performance. The spotlight was on him, but it felt different this time. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't scary. It felt right. When the final scene ended and the audience stood to clap, Eli felt something shift inside him. Not just relief, but pride. Backstage, students patted him on the back. Jake even gave him a high five. "Dude, you killed it," he said, grinning. "Seriously, that was awesome." Eli smiled, a real one this time. "Thanks." And then Jeff was there, still in his suit, still with that business look on his face. But there was something else too. Something softer. "You were great," Jeff said, his voice calm. "I didn't know you could act like that." Eli looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot you don't know. Jeff seemed to hear the meaning behind those words. He didn't push back, just gave a small smile. Maybe we should fix that. Eli didn't say anything, but the idea didn't sound so bad. Maybe they could try. As the lights dimmed and the crowd filed out, Eli stood there with the others, feeling different. Not because of who his dad was, or what anyone thought, but because of what he did. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. And he didn't feel like someone else's shadow. He felt like himself. And that was more than enough. The next day, everything seemed normal again. Eli walked into school like he always did, head down, hands in his pockets. He had made peace with the fact that the play wasn't for him. His audition had been a disaster, and he didn't need to be reminded of it. He figured he'd just stick to being the quiet guy in the back of the room. Nobody bothered him that way. But then, something weird happened. As Eli made his way through the crowded hallway, he heard whispers, low voices, full of curiosity. He didn't pay much attention at first, but the whispers seemed to follow him, getting louder. He kept his head down, trying to ignore them. Then he caught a word that made him freeze. Eli. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd. A couple of girls from his class were standing by their lockers, giggling, pointing. They were looking right at him. Did you see? One of them said, her voice full of excitement. That car yesterday. It was his. Eli blinked, confused. My car. He mumbled to himself, but no one seemed to hear. His heart raced as he started walking faster, trying to get away from the conversation. But everywhere he went, he heard it again. Someone else whispered, he's Jeff Bezos' son. Eli stopped in his tracks. Jeff Bezos. He knew who that was. Everyone did. The billionaire, the Amazon guy. But why was his name even coming up in school? He turned the corner and saw more kids gathered around, their phones out, looking at something on the screen. Some of them turned to him with wide eyes, like they were seeing a ghost. One of the boys, Jake, nudged his friend. Yo, Eli, is that your dad's car out there? Eli felt his stomach drop. It was one of those luxury cars that seemed out of place in the school parking lot. Shiny black with tinted windows. The kind of car you only saw in movies or on the news. But Eli didn't want the attention. He didn't want anyone to know who his dad was. Sure, he had seen the car before. His mom's ex-husband, Jeff Bezos, sometimes showed up for a visit. But it wasn't something he talked about. It wasn't something he wanted to talk about. No, Eli said, trying to brush it off. It's not mine. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. Seriously, because everyone's saying it's him. You sure that's not your dad? Eli could feel the weight of their eyes on him, like 1,000 questions were hanging in the air. All he wanted was to disappear. He didn't want to be the kid with the famous dad. He didn't want to be that guy. But somehow, it seemed like he couldn't escape it. As he walked away, the whispers followed him. Eli's dad is Jeff Bezos. He heard someone say, louder now. No way. Eli wished he could just melt into the walls and become invisible. All of a sudden, everything felt so much bigger than it had the day before. Eli was the quiet kid in the back of the classroom. He always sat by the window, looking outside like the world was happening somewhere else. Most days, he kept his head down, his eyes on his notebook, avoiding the spotlight. His classmates didn't mind. In fact, they'd barely noticed. Eli didn't stand out. He never raised his hand. And he definitely didn't speak up unless he had to. On the first day of 7th grade, when Mr. Davis announced he was casting for the school play, Eli barely reacted. He wasn't interested in acting. The idea of being in front of a crowd made him feel sick to his stomach. But the way Mr. Davis talked about the play made it sound fun, like it was something everyone could do. You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Davis had said, a wide grin stretching across his face. We're all going to have a good time. Just bring your energy, your creativity. This is for everyone. Eli didn't believe that. Everyone knew that kids like him, quiet, reserved, the ones who blended into the background, weren't the ones who got to shine. The loud, confident kids would get the parts. It was how things worked. When the sign-up sheet went around, Eli hesitated. He didn't want to join, didn't want anyone looking at him, judging him. But then he thought about something. It was just a play. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe, just maybe, he could do it, and no one would even notice. So he signed his name, but he didn't tell anyone. Not his friends, not his mom, not even his teachers. He showed up on the day of auditions with a crumpled script, trying to hide his nerves behind a pair of oversized glasses. The auditions were taking place in the school's tiny theater, a room that smelled like dust and old paint. When it was finally his turn, he walked to the center of the stage and stood there, feeling like the world was watching him. Mr. Davis was sitting in the front row, his eyes bright with excitement, while a few other students sat nearby, chatting amongst themselves. Eli cleared his throat, holding the script in both hands. "What's my line again?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Davis smiled warmly, not at all fazed by the awkwardness. "Just start with your first line," he said. Eli nodded, and as he began to speak, the words didn't come out the way he wanted. They stumbled, tripped over each other, and seemed to echo in the empty theater. He could feel his face turning red. Every mistake felt like it was magnified. By the time he finished, he could barely look up. Mr. Davis clapped politely, but there was no hiding the disappointment in his eyes. "Good try, Eli," he said. "Good effort." Eli nodded quickly, rushed off the stage, and didn't look back. That night, lying in bed, he replayed it over and over in his head, the way Mr. Davis had smiled at him. But his eyes had said something else, something that made Eli feel like he wasn't enough, like he didn't belong. And then the thought came. Maybe some people just aren't meant for the spotlight. Eli stepped outside into the cold air, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He could feel the stares from every direction, the whispers trailing behind him like a shadow. The black car was still parked at the front of the school, and Jeff Bezos was standing next to it, talking to a couple of teachers who seemed way too excited to see him. Eli didn't know why his dad was here. The last time they talked, he'd barely said more than a few words before disappearing again, off to do whatever billionaires did. Eli had never really been interested in that world. It was full of things that felt strange to him. Private jets, fancy dinners, meetings in far-off places. None of it made sense to him, and he hated that it was now making his life at school more complicated. As Eli walked past Jeff, he tried to keep his head down, hoping his dad wouldn't notice him. But of course he did. "Eli," Jeff called out, his voice carrying over the quiet chatter of the students who were still watching. "Hey, buddy, come say hi." Eli's heart sank. The last thing he wanted was to draw more attention to himself. He could feel all the eyes on him, the curiosity, the expectation. It felt like everyone was waiting to see if he'd live up to the idea they had in their heads about what it meant to be Jeff Bezos' kid. He hesitated, then walked over slowly. His dad was smiling, looking like he hadn't a care in the world. He was dressed in a suit, like he always was, and he had that same confident air about him, like everything was always under control. "Hey, Eli," Jeff said, bending down slightly to give him a half-hug. "How've you been?" Eli just nodded. "Good." He didn't know what else to say. His dad had never really asked him how he was doing before. It was always about business, or the last time they met. There was never any real conversation. That's good," Jeff said, still smiling. "I was just talking with the principal about some things. I'll be around for a bit. If you need anything, just let me know." Eli didn't answer. He just nodded again. He didn't need anything from his dad. In fact, he wished his dad wasn't even here. As Eli stood there, trying not to feel like the center of attention, he noticed a few students who had come closer. They were staring at him now, waiting for some kind of reaction. "Yo, is that your dad?" one of the boys from his class asked. He looked at Eli like he couldn't believe it. "The Jeff Bezos? For real?" Eli just nodded, feeling the heat rise in his face. It wasn't like he could deny it. Everyone knew. But he didn't want to be that kid. He didn't want to be known for who his dad was. "Yeah," Eli said quietly, looking at his shoes. "That's him." The boy grinned. "Man, that's crazy. You must be loaded, huh?" Eli didn't reply. He didn't have the words for it. What could he say? Yes, he had money, but money didn't change the fact that his dad wasn't around. It didn't fix the awkwardness, the distance. Money didn't make him feel less alone. His dad clapped him on the back, breaking the silence. "Take care, buddy," he said before turning back to talk to the teachers. Eli stood there for a moment longer, the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He felt like he was trapped in a story he didn't want to be part of, but it was too late to go back. The whispers had already started, and there was no way to escape. Eli didn't want to look outside the window anymore. He couldn't. Every time he glanced out, he saw the car again. The black, shiny luxury car with the tinted windows. It was parked just outside the school gate, and kids were already crowding around it, whispering, snapping pictures. His stomach twisted in knots. The day before, he had tried to avoid it. He had walked quickly past the car, pretending not to notice all the eyes on him. But it didn't work. The whispers had followed him, and now they were everywhere. Today, the car was back. He tried to ignore it as he walked to his next class, but there was no escaping the buzz. People were talking about him more than ever. And every time he tried to disappear into the crowd, someone would say his name, or worse, mention his dad's name, Jeff Bezos. It felt like his whole world was being turned upside down. By the time he got to history class, Eli had already had enough. He sat at his usual desk, eyes on the floor, hoping he could get through the day without anyone talking to him. But then, the door opened, and there was a sudden hush in the room. Eli barely looked up. "Hey, Eli," a voice said, and Eli's heart skipped a beat. It was Jake. Eli sighed. He didn't want to deal with this. Not now. Not ever. "What's up, Jake?" Eli asked quietly, keeping his eyes on his desk. "Your dad's outside," Jake said, almost too casually. "I think he's here to pick you up or something. He's, kind of hard to miss." Eli froze. What was he talking about? He slowly turned his head toward the window. And there, parked just outside the school, was the black car. But there was more. Standing by the car, talking to a few teachers, was a man Eli recognized instantly. It was Jeff Bezos, Eli's dad. He didn't want to admit it, but the sight of him made Eli's stomach churn. He hadn't seen his dad in a while. He hadn't wanted to see him. The visits were always awkward, and Jeff's presence had a way of making everything feel bigger than it was. His dad was a giant in the world, and Eli was just Eli. Eli looked down at his hands, feeling suddenly very small. Why was he here? He couldn't help it. He felt his face heat up. His classmates were already staring out the window, watching Jeff like he was some kind of celebrity. But for Eli, it was just his dad, a man who had always been there only when it was convenient for him. The bell rang, and the classroom came back to life, with the noise of desks scraping and kids chatting. Eli slowly stood up, gathering his books. He tried to act normal, tried to walk out the door without making a scene. But as he passed by Jake's desk, Jake stopped him. "Yo, Eli," Jake said with a grin. "You're really gonna make us wait to meet the man? Come on, he's gotta be cool, right?" Eli felt his heart race. He had never wanted the attention. He had never wanted people to look at him like this. But somehow, it felt like it was too late to go back. He didn't say anything. He just walked out of the classroom, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on his back. The next few days felt like a blur. Eli tried to focus on school, but it wasn't easy. Every time he turned a corner, There was someone else whispering about him. It was like the world had shifted, and now he was the center of attention. And no matter how much he wished he could ignore it, he couldn't. It wasn't just his classmates anymore. Teachers were starting to notice him too. Mr. Davis kept checking in on him, and a few others had started acting differently around him. Some even tried to be extra friendly, like they thought Eli needed their support just because of his dad. Eli hated it. He didn't want people to treat him differently. He didn't want to be the rich kid or the kid with the famous dad. He just wanted to be normal. But it seemed like he couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, there was always someone watching, always someone talking about him. That afternoon, during lunch, Eli found a quiet corner of the cafeteria, hoping to be left alone. He opened his book, pretending to read, but his mind wasn't on the pages. He could still hear the soft murmur of voices around him. He could still feel the weight of their gazes on his back. Then he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around, surprised to see Jake standing there, a grin on his face. "Hey, Eli," Jake said, leaning in like they were about to share some secret. "So I heard your dad's doing something big with Amazon again. Like making a new kind of spaceship or something. Is that true?" Eli just stared at him for a second. He wanted to roll his eyes and tell Jake to leave him alone. But instead, he just shrugged. "I don't know," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't really keep up with his business stuff." Jake looked disappointed. "Come on, man. You're telling me you don't care about what he's up to. Your dad's one of the richest guys in the world." Eli felt the heat rise in his face. "Yeah, well, it's not like I'm a part of it," he muttered. "I don't even talk to him much." Jake didn't seem to hear the bitterness in Eli's voice. "Seriously?" he asked, his eyes widening. "That's crazy. I would be all over that kind of thing. Think about it. You could get whatever you want." Eli shook his head, feeling frustrated. "It's not like that, Jake." Jake didn't respond, just stared at him for a moment. Then he seemed to snap out of it, giving a half laugh. Okay, I get it. But hey, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here, man." Eli didn't know what to say. He didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to talk about any of it. Jake gave him a thumbs up and walked away, leaving Eli to his thoughts. Eli sat there for a while longer, the noise of the cafeteria fading into the background. He was tired. Tired of trying to pretend that everything was okay. Tired of dealing with people who thought they understood his life just because they knew his dad's name. He closed his book and stood up, his mind racing. Maybe he didn't need to stay here. Maybe he could just leave. But as soon as he thought it, he realized something. He couldn't just run away from this. Not anymore. No matter how hard he tried, the spotlight was always going to find him. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to start figuring out what to do with that.